Castro ng De La Salle Department of Political Science, Department of International Studies. Nandito rin si Dr. Richard Heydarian, sa political analyst at columnist ng Philippine Daily Inquirer. In-expect natin si Atty. Batongbacal ng UP College of Law, Institute of Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. Is one of the experts tungkol sa West Philippine Sea. At he was our guest last week, pero may mga ibang developments na would like him to comment on. We also received notice na si Colonel MEDEL Aguilar will be coming to read a statement. I think we don't know kung ano yung statement niya. Pero I suppose it's a very important one. Kaya hinabol para for this morning's session. Anyway, we'll tackle the issue of the West Philippine Sea and the situation in this vital body of water. Sino gusto magsimula? Ikaw na. Sige, ano yung bago dito sa issue na ito?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, thank you very much for gracing the occasion. I really enjoy having interaction with you regarding issues that, of course, is of great relevance to our country. And before I begin my very short presentation or discussion, let me first welcome a colleague of mine from De La Salle University who decided to join us. And that's no less, of course, Professor Richard Heydarian, who's here also to share with us, of course, his thoughts and ideas regarding issues that we will be discussing today. So I've been asked to talk about the West Philippine Sea issue, specifically, of course, the recent development that has to do, of course, with the harassment of our Coast Guard vessel on August 5. When we talk about the West Philippine Sea issue, actually there's two components or two aspects. The first one, which we focus on generally, of course, given what happened last August 5, was what I would call, what's happening on the ground. The geopolitical dynamics of China's efforts to force us to remove the BRP Sierra Madre on Ayungin Shoal. But what we have not really tackled, and something that I, hopefully, and Richard, and probably Jay would also mention, is the other aspect, which is in fact more dangerous because this is extremely divisive, and that is Chinese influence operation that has become more intense as China, of course, tries to be more assertive in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. So I don't know if you've noticed, they have been very active in terms of forum and in terms of the media. And what is very alarming is, of course, the fact that they magnify Chinese narrative regarding the issue. Now, what are those Chinese narratives? Number one, of course, the fact that it's only natural for the Chinese Coast Guard to harass, use water cannon, and prevent the resupply of our very small garrison on board the BRP Sierra Madre. So the narrative here is, what they're doing is natural, which is, of course, that's not the case because it ignores the fact that they have no business being that area. Inside our exclusive economic zone, and of course, this has been reaffirmed by the July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling. So, international law is on our side, and of course, despite this, the Chinese are basically still claiming that the water surrounding Ayungin Shoal, and Ayungin Shoal itself is part of the Chinese territory. And of course, this has been magnified by some Filipinos, analysts, or quote and unquote, I would use the term academics, even sporting the title of professor. Then the other narrative, of course, has to do with the fact that there has been an agreement. Whereas, of course, we have heard from the two sons of President Joseph Estrada, and recently, of course, the former Secretary of National Defense, Secretary Orly Mercado, who basically said, no, there's no agreement whatsoever. Of course, the Chinese has not been able to present any evidence that there's been any deal so far. So we'll be listening to a lot of their narratives, no? And the one that really makes me very much concerned is a statement from their Deputy Chief of Mission last Monday that there seems to be supposed to be a consensus, so forth and so on. This is something very dangerous because it basically is trying to extinguish our voice regarding this issue. There is no consensus with China regarding this issue because what is clear is we have a ongoing territorial dispute, and China, the mere fact that China is using pressure and coercion upon us indicates that there's no consensus whatsoever. So I will start my presentation here, my discussion here. I'm looking forward to an exchange, and I'm giving the floor now to my colleague in De La Salle University, Professor Richard Heydarian.
Salamat, Professor Rene. Good morning po. First time ko yata nandito. No? So it's definitely a pleasure to be here. I'm gonna wear my academic hat from University of the Philippines just in case my competition kayo sa Inquirer or TV5 or whatever media I'm working with. Asian Center. So I'm just gonna be very, I'm just gonna go to the heart of the issue while hinintay po natin yung mga ibang guests natin. I'm sure Professor Castro also has a lot to share. Yeah, nandiyan si Professor J. Batongbacal. Okay, alam naman natin saan talaga nagsimula itong discussion na ito, no? Ito yung in light of the comments by some of the patriots, no? And outspoken patriots dyan sa ating gobyerno, most especially si Dr. J. Tariela, no? Dun sa itong problema na kung saan meron tayong mga kababayan, or supposedly kababayan, na mukhang kaysa i-emphasize yung mali ng ibang bansa, no? Kaysa i-emphasize na hindi tamang bullying, no? Whether yung claim mo ay approved by international body or not, ang ginagawa po is gina-justify, parang nag-apologize for that. Now, first of all, let me give a couple of disclaimers. For me, first of all, minsan nakakabahala yung mga discourse about patriotism at yung traidor, yung mga ganyan discussion, because unfortunately it tends to go into the realm of racialist and racist commentaries. Nakikita ko yan dahil active po tayo sa social media. As someone who is a media practitioner himself, I'm brutally, I have to be brutally honest because nakikita ko yan, di ba? Na if you come from certain background and then you make points that tend to be more reflective of the, let's say, Beijing point of view, you tend to get a certain kind of response. And for me, mali talaga yan. And that's why I think it's also unfair to unnecessarily scrutinize certain communities like the Chinoy community and essentially force them to do kind of a loyalty oath. I think that's quite unfair because yung pagiging Filipino is not about your ethno-linguistic or racial background. Being Filipino was never a racial thing. No? And yes, it's absolutely clear. Lahat kami dito, mga academics dito, we have had history working in the academic world. At bilang mga academics, yes, karapatan mo talaga to be able to present different points of view na not necessarily sangayon dun sa point of view ng Pilipinas. Ginagawa namin yan. Ako, Jay, Professor De Castro, we have had many publications on the South China Sea issue. We don't even call it in West Philippine Sea kung nandun kami sa mga academic platforms. In-explain namin anong point of view of Vietnam, anong point of view of China, anong point of view of Pilipinas. Minsan, kinikriticize pa namin yung point of view ng Pilipinas. For instance, tayo nangunang bansa na gumawa ng mga facilities dyan, katulad ng airstrip, nung panahon pa ni Marcos Sr. No? So, bilang scholars, we're trained to present different points of view. Parang octopus, di ba? On one hand, on the other hand. And then, you can give your assessment. Sinong mas valid, sinong hindi valid, based on legal or geopolitical or other kinds of understanding. Pero, iba po yung usapin, and I think this is where we have to be also honest. Iba po yung usapin na ginagamit mo yung supposedly objectivity and supposedly scholarly argument to actually do something else. No? At kitang-kita natin dun sa ibang tao na they're claiming to make objective scholarly analysis when in fact, consistently, they're making analysis in favor of another country. And in this case, the very country that has been bullying us. Hindi na po yan scholarly, hindi na po yan objective. Not to mention, as correctly pointed out by Professor De Castro, the claims to academic credentials by some of these people is highly questionable, to put it nicely. No? Mag-Google Scholar lang po kayo, lagay niyo yung pangalan ng iba dyan, barely anything comes out. Diba? So that tells you about this weaponization of academic titles, or supposedly my think tank, etc. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a think tank with a certain policy bias. Normal po yan. Sa Amerika, meron liberal think tanks, meron, let's say, more conservative, pero at least transparent sila. Openly they say, they advocate for this. And transparent din sila dun sa kanilang funding, saan sila kumukuha ng funding, and accordingly, they can be criticized or not. Ang problema po natin is people who claim to be scholars, who claim to be non-partisan, when in fact, pag tinignan mo yung mga sinasabi nila over 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, consistent sila. And not for the Filipino argument. Not for the argument of the Filipino side pagdating sa West Philippine Sea. And that's where the concept of sharp power comes into the picture. Actually, to be honest, I and Jay actually spent a lot of time in Taiwan as Taiwan fellows. And yung mga nakapunta sa Taiwan, you would know that in Taiwan, they will constantly warn you about so-called sharp power or influence operations that will sinabi ni Professor De Castro. And this is essentially a situation whereby an authoritarian power weaponizes yung mga democratic freedoms sa mga rival or target nations to manipulate public opinion, to undermine their democratic institution, and to sow discord. So ito po ay isang systematic effort. The most notable of that, of course, were accusations by U.S. intelligence agency na yung Russia po ay involved in disinformation, and that may have tilted the elections in favor of a candidate or two, right? So, 2016 pa lang, medyo namulat na tayo na there are authoritarian superpowers there who are weaponizing our freedom of expression, weaponizing freedoms within our systems to use it against us. Now, hindi lang Taiwan, countries like Australia, countries like Singapore, yung mga Canada, we can go on and on, but the Taiwan and Singapore is interesting because they're Chinese majority themselves. They themselves have legislations, foreign influence acts or legislations or initiatives or transparency initiatives, which clearly points out itong realidad ng sharp power operations. There's a fantastic piece in Washington Post recently about worries that even Singapore government-backed radio institutions are beginning to echo the lines of someone else, and that's creating a lot of trouble and worry among Singaporean officials. So, medyo huli tayo sa laban in that sense, no? Because it's ironic that the Philippines has been at the forefront of what many of us see as a new Cold War. Vienna pala more than Berlin, you can put it that way, of 1950s, circa 1950s. But it looks like in terms of public policy discourse, ngayon lang tayo, medyo namulat dito sa katotohanan na yan, which a lot of our neighbors have been openly discussing that. Now, I mentioned Australia, Canada, Taiwan, because these are democratic countries. So just because you say there's influence operations, hindi ibig sabihin, i-restrict mo yung freedom of expression. You can always strike a good balance between democratic freedoms and national security. And we can get best lessons from these kind of countries. But let me end on this point. I mean, for me, siguro lahat kami in one way or another, medyo traumatized talaga kami over the past 5 to 6 years because kami po yung mga academics, no? So usually we work within academic platforms. But so when we come out and try to explain what's Philippines, ay dahil gusto namin magserbisyo sa taong bayan. And yet what happened, especially under the previous administration, you know, I don't want to be too political or partisan about it, was parang kami pa yung nag-gaslight. Kami pa yung warmongers. And one of the sad things is that just because some of us got their PhD in the US, are working with some think tanks in the US, or I don't know, East-West Center study, biglang itatag ka na US funded. That's libelous. I've talked to my legal team. That's libelous. No? And it's ironic. People are saying, wag mo kami i-brand na pro-China, openly coming out and branding anyone else who just happened to work with any American institution as US funded. That's a very serious charge. That's a libelous charge. No, from some of these charlatans that we have there. Now, what I want to say is this. Hindi naman sa bayaran or something like that. I know that's the fear of some people. I think there's also sometimes this problem of what I call the Ricarte syndrome. Right? Kung maalala niyo si Artemio Ricarte, siya yung last revolutionary. No? Siya yung ayaw mag-pledge ng oath of allegiance sa US. Pero sa sobrang consume niya sa anger niya, sa mga Amerikano, bulag siya doon sa bagong katotohanan, which is Imperial Japan. No? And eventually, hindi siya binayaran ng Japan necessarily. He thought the Japanese will be the liberation for the Filipino people. At dyan nangyari yung makapili and all of that. My fear is, we're seeing echoes of that today. Whereby, may mga tao na sobrang galit dun sa ginawa ng Amerika nung Balanggiga 100 years ago. Or yung kakulangan ng Amerika in terms of yung tulong nila sa atin nung panahon ng Panganiban Reef, or Mischief Reef. No? But that is essentially blinding them to the reality of the bullying and non-Western imperialism na nakita natin sa sarili natin bakuran. So that's why for me, very tragic din ito. Kasi yung iba dyan, kilala ko sila eh. I know them personally. I had a lot of interactions with them. I know these are people who want the Philippines to be more independent, but they're just focusing on the West. And for all the faults of the US, hindi po yung Amerika ang nagbubuli sa atin sa West Philippine Sea. Hindi po ang Amerika ang nagtatreta na mag-invade ng Taiwan. So I generally hope, lahat kami dito, mga taga-UP, we're very aware of the leftist critique of US imperialism and all of that. For whatever legitimacy those arguments may have, it doesn't justify yung nangyari ngayon sa sarili natin bakuran sa West Philippine Sea. Mali po yan. And I hope medyo mamulat yung mga iba dyan because I'm really sad to see what's going on with some of these people who are apologizing, spinning, and justifying bullying of the Filipino people. Converse ng red tagging. Yun po yung ginagawa sa mga katulad namin who are trying to emphasize yung the Filipino perspective and point of view. And they're not allowing the Filipino people to have a proper understanding ng sarili natin mga karapatan and sovereign rights. And you know what? It's true. The arbitration award, Jay will explain to you, did not settle whether sa atin yung mga, let's say, yung mga isla dyan, although questionable ilan bang talaga mga rocks and islands dyan. But I think if China was okay with it and other countries were okay with it, and if we took it to international court, precisely because we have continuous and effective exercise of sovereignty, I think we have a pretty good chance of winning it, except China will never be open to take it to international court anyway. So yung argument na just because hindi na-prove yung arbitration award ng 2016 na sa atin yan, doesn't make it okay for you to argue na, hindi, baka naman sa kanila yan, sa kapila yan, so wala tayong karapatan. That kind of argument is very facetious and very questionable. But questionable in a much more dangerous way because we don't know why they're making that argument over and over and over again. Because I, Jay, and Rene, you can find us in conferences criticizing Philippine foreign policy. We criticize the Duterte administration. We criticize the Aquino administration. Yun po yung ginagawa namin bilang scholars. But when you consistently argue against the Filipino case, medyo ibang usapan po yan. At I think that's the context of our conversation today. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much.
Sige. Ang tanong ko, to give yung current controversy over the West Philippine Sea, pakipaliwanag niyo paano nag-evolve yung 9-dash line ng position ng China. I understand 1948 yata officially dineclare yun and panahon pa ni Chiang Kai-shek. Tapos kailan inano ito ng Beijing?
Sige.
Para lang maliwanagan sila kung ano yung punot dulo ng ano.
Ganito yan. Yung strat list, diba? Nandyan yan ever since. Pero hindi yan okupado ng kahit kanino until mga 1930s. Okay? Bago mag-Second World War. Noong 1930s, yung France na kolonya, di ba ang colony niya ang Vietnam, so basis sa Vietnam. Clean niya yung ilang isla dyan, yung mga pinakamalalaking isla, mga 7. Okay. Ang ginawa nila yon, umalma ang Japan. Kasi ang Japan, nandun sa ilang isla, ginagamit nila yung guano, yung mga tayo ng ibon. Kasi yun yung fertilizer, yung pinaka-rich na fertilizer. So minimina nila yung for fertilizer. So umalma yung Japan. Okay? Nung nagbabat-batan sila, napansin ng China. Bigla na lang ang China sabi, hindi amin yan. Mga isla yan. So doon nag-umpisa itong pagkiklaim. No? Wala naman talagang basihan din yung mga claim ng China at that time. Kasi bago nun, ang sinasabi nila, ang pinaka-southernmost na boundary nila, nandun sa Paracel Islands, which is much further up north. Okay? Mas malayo. So dahil siguro na-confuse sila, akala nila yun yung mga isla na yon. Okay? Teka lang. Hindi ko na sila papasin. Okay. So yun yung unang unang time na nagkaroon ng issue dyan sa Spratlys. Dito sa Pilipinas, under the US pa tayo, ang US hindi nakialam. Kasi para sa kanya, hindi niya alam kung sino ang may-ari ng Spratly Islands. Wala kasing pumapansin doon from that time, during that time. Merong mga ilang Pilipino katulad ni Senator Isabelo de los Reyes na nagsabi na hindi, sa Pilipinas dapat yan dahil malapit sa Pilipinas yan. Pero hindi nag-agree yung US. Kaya neutral ever since yung position ng US kasi kaalyado niya yung Vietnam. Maganda yung, at the time, medyo maganda yung relationship nila with Japan. No? At saka China, kaalyado din bali ng US during that time. This is before the Second World War. Okay. Now, nung nagkaroon ng Second World War, kinuha yan ng Japan. No? Kasi di ba, in-invade nila yung Taiwan, in-invade nila ang Pilipinas. So, pati yung mga isla na yan, kinuha din nila. Tapos, ginawa nilang probinsya siya sa ilalim ng Taiwan. Okay? During the war. Alam naman natin, natalo ang Japan sa gera. And they were forced to surrender and sign a peace agreement. So, give up niya yung mga isla na yan. Pero hindi niya sinabi na binibigay niya kahit kanino doon sa mga previous claimant. No? So, bali, ang posisyon ng Pilipinas dyan, ibig sabihin, since walang pinagsulian ng mga isla na yan, open uli siya para sa ibang bansa na i-acquire, no? Napunin, kinin. Okay. So, tayo, sa Pilipinas, hindi tayo umaksyon dyan, no? Pero merong mga private citizen na based sa Manila na nagkiklaim ng isla. Yung una si Morton Mills, isang GI, former GI ng US na nag-set up ng business sa Manila. No? Siya yung actually nauna nagsasabi na sa kanya yung isla. Nag-declare siya ng Kingdom of Humanity. At nag-i-issue siya ng mga stamp, no? Doon sa Kingdom of Humanity na yon. Post-war period, mga 1946-47. Naging obvious na lang siya, kumbaga conman, no? Scammer. Okay? So eventually, inaresto siya. Ang tawag nila doon, mail fraud, which is a US offense. Anyway, so out of the picture si Morton Mills. In the meantime, si Tomas Cloma at saka yung brother niya, si Filemon Cloma, sila yung may-ari ng isang malaking fishing fleet based sa Bohol. Sila rin yung nagtayo ng unang nautical school, yung school para sa mga seaman. Diyan sila nangingisda. Okay, sa Spratlys. Tayo actually yung mas nauna siguro ng isda dun sa area na yon, ng malakihan. Kasi we had Tomas Cloma and his fleet being based there. So nag-decide si Tomas Cloma noong 1956 na angkinin itong mga isla para sa sarili niya. Kinin niya na sarili niyang lugar, teritoryo. In fact, parang ginawa niya, para siyang umaangkin ng lupa sa public domain. Yung nag-issue pa siya ng notice to the whole world yung ginawa niya. Hindi niya yun inangkin in the name of the Philippines. Inangkin niya yun para sa sarili lang niya. No? At siya pa nga yung head of state daw. Okay. Dahil doon hindi siya pinansin naman ng Pilipinas, ng government ng Philippines. Okay. In fact, ang pumansin lang sa kanya ay yung Taiwan. Yung Taiwan, nagpapunta ng dalawang barko dun sa Ituaba, kung saan nag-base si Cloma. Inayo niya yung center ng kanyang bagong estado na kaya tinawagan niyang Freedom Land. Okay? At pinaalis siya. No? Parang in-eject siya, parang squatter. Pinauwi siya. Okay? So, simula nun, nagtayo ng garrison ng Taiwan doon sa pinakamalaking isla ng Ituaba. Okay. At tumahimik. Okay. Walang gumalaw dyan until mga 1960s, yung Pilipinas, no, nag-decide na angkinin yung mga natitirang isla. No? Kaya nagtayo tayo sa Pag-asa, sa Lawak, sa Patat. Yan yung mga isla na occupied natin ngayon, yung mga naturally formed islands, kinuha natin. So yun yung pinakamalalaking isla dyan sa Spratlys, maliban sa Ituaba at saka Spratly Island mismo. Okay? Malipas ang ilang pang taon, dineclare na ng Pilipinas na sa kanya yung mga yon. Kasi nga, nandun tayo for several years na wala naman daw nangahas na paalisin tayo. Nandun din yung Taiwan pero kumbaga hindi naman nag-i-interact. Napilitan ng Pilipinas na gawin yon, i-announce yon kasi at one point, may isang barko na lulan si Ramon Mitra, yung dating speaker. This is mga late 1960s or early 70s. Nung napalapit kasi sila dun sa Ituaba, pinaputukan sila. Okay? So dahil doon, umaksyon na yung Pilipinas. Okay? So since that time, yung ibang bansa, nagsimula rin mag-occupy ng kung anong makita nila. So sumunod yung Vietnam at saka yung Malaysia. At the time, South Vietnam pa. Okay? Then sumunod yung Malaysia. And then lastly, yung China. Yung China, wala nang inabutang isla. Kaya mga bahura na lang ang tinayuan niya. Okay. Now, so yun yung pinagsimulan niyan. Bakit kiniklaim ng China yan? Kasi noong 1947, okay, matapos ng gera, nagtuloy yung civil war sa China. Nahati sila between the communists at saka the Kuomintang. Yung Kuomintang natalo ng communist, na-take over ng communist yung mainland China, tapos yung Kuomintang party nag-retreat sa Taiwan. Okay. Dahil doon sa civil war na yon, parang isa sa mga malalaking issue, siyempre, pag mayroon kang civil war, no, ano ba yung China? No? Ano yung, kumbaga, para sa mga tao nila, ano yung imahinasyon ng China? How do you imagine China? So, yung mga taga-Kuomintang nag-issue ng mapa. No? Na dinawing ulit ng China. Tapos this time, dahil napansin na nila yung mga isla dyan sa Spratlys, no? Doon sila nag-drawing ng original na dash line map. 1947, pero ang linya 11. So it's actually an 11 dash line map at the time. Okay? Pero dahil 1947 ito, wala pang UNCLOS nito, wala pang masyadong usapan tungkol sa karagatan at the time. Malinaw na ang kiniklaim lang niya ay yung mga isla. Okay? Sinasabi niya sa kanya daw yon, pero wala naman siyang talagang prior na basis para doon, maliban sa nangingisda pa minsan-minsan yung mga Chinese fishermen doon sa lugar. Nangingisda din naman tayo doon sa lugar, ganun din yung mga Vietnamese. Okay? Nung time na yon, hindi nila in-explain talaga ano yung kiniklaim nila. No? At dahil nga doon sa panahon na yun, ang pwede mo lang i-claim mga isla, in-assume na lang ng ibang bansa na isla lang yung kiniklaim nila, hindi yung mga katubigan sa paligid noon. Okay. And that was the same case until mga 1970s, yung 11 dash line na yon, binawasan nila ng dalawa. Okay. Binura nila yung dalawang linya na malapit sa Vietnam. Okay. Ito yung sa Gulf of Tonkin. Okay. Bakit nila ginawa yun? Kasi, maalala nyo, sinuportahan ng China yung revolution sa Vietnam, yung communist revolution sa Vietnam. Sila yung nagpondo, nagbigay ng armas, etc. Nanalo yung Communist Party sa Vietnam. No? So, bilang bilang simbolo ng kaisahan, no, with the Communist Party, no, sinabi nila ini-negotiate na lang with Vietnam yung side na yon, yung party na yon. Kaya binura yung linya, kaya naging siyam. And until from that time on, with inside China, nag-i-issue sila ng mga drawing, mga mapa na nakalagay yung 9-dash line. Okay? Pero never pa rin nilang in-explain kung ano yung ibig sabihin ng 9-dash line na yon. Kiniklaim lang ba nila yung isla, kiniklaim ba nila pati tubig, etc. Okay, never. And up until 1990s, may mga articles na sinusulat yung mga Chinese scholars trying to explain ano yung 9-dash line. Yung isa nga, mga 1996, kung di ako nakakamali, sinulat ng isang scholar na eventually naging judge sa ITLOS. Nagbigay siya ng iba-ibang explanation kung ano posible interpretasyon ng 9-dash line. Isla lang ba yan? Kasama ba yung katubigan? Historic rights ba yan? Etc. Hindi siya sigurado kung alin. Pero ino-offer niya yon para pag-usapan. Okay. So, by 2000s, okay, lahat na nung bansa dito sa Southeast Asia, nag-umpisa na mag-implement ng UNCLOS. Kasi nag-enter into force yung UNCLOS 1994. By 2009, parang lahat ng smaller Southeast Asian countries, nag-decide na sila na kahit silang lahat nag-claim dito sa Spratlys, no? i-align na nila yung mga claim nila in accordance with international law. Okay? So yung Vietnam at saka yung Malaysia, nagkaroon ng isang claim para sa isang extended continental shelf. Nilinaw nila bale na kiniklaim nila yung mga yung Vietnam, yung mga isla ng Spratlys, kalahat. Yung sa Malaysia, ilang parti lang. No? Pero yung katubigan, no, base pa rin sa UNCLOS. Ang Pilipinas, nag-enact ng RA 9522, okay? Sinabi natin sa RA 9522 na itong mga isla na to, sa Spratlys natin, yung Calayan Island Group, base yan sa, i-claim natin yan at saka yung katubigan yan, base sa UNCLOS din. Okay? So yung mga maliliit na bansa, bale, sa Southeast Asia, lahat sila gumagamit na ngayon ng international law ng UNCLOS. Yung China, kabaligtaran ang naging reaksyon. Kasi nakita niya na kung base sa international law, edi lawful, legitimate yung mga claim ng mga Southeast Asian nations sa kanilang mga EEZ at continental shelf. No? Ayaw niya yon kasi inaangkin niya, gusto niya angkinin bale yung lahat ng mga katubigan ng mga yon. Kaya nag-double down siya, no? Ibig sabihin lalo lang siya nagmatigas na lahat daw ng South China Sea halos ay sa kanya by historic right, no? Or historic facts or historic waters, no? Na wala namang basihan yon, no? Lalo na kung UNCLOS ang gagamitin kasi sa UNCLOS pwede mo lang gamitin ng historic rights, historic waters sa mga bay. Okay? Bays and gulfs na talagang kinilala na historic waters. Okay? Yung South China Sea, never yan kinilala na historic waters ng China. Kahit ba yung pangalan niya ay South China Sea, hindi nung ibig sabihin na pag-aari siya ng China. Okay? So simula nun, talagang nagmatigas ng todo ang China. Kaya ngayon, ang ginagawa niya, nagpapalakas siya, ginagamit niya yung dahas at talagang fino-force niya, ini-impose niya yung sarili niya dito sa lahat ng ibang mas maliliit na bansa. Okay? Kasama ng Pilipinas. Okay? Lahat ng Southeast Asian nations naniniwala sa UNCLOS, naniniwala na ang paghahati-hati sa South China Sea dapat ay ayon sa UNCLOS. Okay? Yun din ang kinikilala ng buong mundo. No? Na dapat yung katubigan dyan, hatiin nyo in accordance with UNCLOS. Ibig sabihin nun, yung lahat ng area na malapit na nasa loob ng 200 nautical miles sa tabi ng mga bansa na yan, ay sa kanila yung lahat ng likas yaman dyan, silang may karapatan dyan. Okay? Pag ganon, edi lahat ng nakapaligid sa South China Sea may kanya-kanyang party bale. Tapos yung gitna ng South China Sea ay common to all. Okay? So, lahat sila meron. Ayaw ng China yon. Gusto niya sa kanya lang lahat. Kaya hanggang ngayon, yun pa rin ang posisyon nila. No? Gusto niya lang ang pinipilit niya yung sarili niyang batas lamang, yung sarili lang naman niyang posisyon. Ang implikasyon nun, ibig sabihin, lahat ng mga lilit na bansa, bale, under sa kanya. Okay? Kaya tayo, ang Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, ayaw tanggapin yon. So, kanya-kanya din tayong galaw, no? Upang panindigan yung ating posisyon na dapat ang paghahati-hati bale sa South China Sea ay ayon sa international law, ayon sa UNCLOS, dahil pag yun ang ginagamit natin, ibig sabihin, sa atin yung kanya-kanyang parte. No? At yan ang kinikilala ng buong mundo. Kung papayagan natin ng China yung manaig, ibig sabihin, sa kanya lahat. At wala tayong parte dyan. Ano yung basihan nun? Bali, wala. No? Kundi yung lakas, yung power, yung poder ng China. Yun lang. Ngayon, ang hirap doon, imagine nyo lang, kung ganun yung ating international community na hindi batas ang umiiral, kundi ang poder, no? Saan pupulutin yung mga maliliit na bansa? Diba? Na hindi maaari makapantay sa lakas ng ibang malalaki at na bansa katulad ng China. So yan ang dahilan kung bakit tayo, ang position lagi natin, no, ay dapat in accordance with international law. Hindi base sa sarili lang nating batas or base lang sa national law katulad ng ginagawa ng China. Yan. So yun po yung story.
Professor, may tanong ako dyan. Kung ang basehan ng 9/11, naging 9-dash line theory ng China ay 1947 Act ng then nationalist China, yung nationalist China, yun yung Taiwan ngayon. Makatutulong ba para sa common good ng mundo kung yung Taiwan i-renounce yung kwento ng 11 or 9-dash line claim? Total, yung Taiwan naman mas kailangan natin ng Pilipinas ngayon for survival.
Siyempre, makakatulong yun, no? Ang hirap lang, siyempre, para sa Taiwan, kumbaga parang pride. Sila yung nag-umpisa niyan, una. Pangalawa, sa ngayon, hindi sila kinikilala ng mga bansa, no? Bilang isang estado. Lahat sila takot sa China, in a way. Lahat sila concerned, no? Na kung anong mangyayari kung sakaling i-recognize nila ang Taiwan bilang separate, independent na bansa, no? At sa ngayon, ang China talagang bawat taon, kumbaga, ina-undermine niya ang Taiwan talaga. Gusto niya ma-isolate yon. Yung mga maliliit na bansa, pinipilit niya lagi na i-withdraw yung recognition sa Taiwan, na putulin yung relations nila sa Taiwan, kapalit ng mga deals nila with mainland China, with the People's Republic of China. Kakaunti na lang tuloy yung natitirang mga bansa na kumikilala sa Taiwan bilang isang independent bali na bansa, no? Lahat ng iba, meron silang tinatawag na One China policy, kinikilala nila yung mainland, no? At tapos, ang relasyon nila sa Taiwan ay commercial lang, kumbaga. No? Pero ayaw nilang, kumbaga, maputang the spot, no? Kung sakaling magkaroon ng issue, umiiwas siya. So, unfortunately, kasama dyan ang Pilipinas, no? Tuwing merong attempt ang Taiwan at Pilipinas na magkaroon ng magandang cooperation, kunwari sa agrikultura, okay? At sa maritime, no? Meron laging biglang magsasabi na One China policy. Biglang lahat yan mawawala. Lahat ng effort na yan, baliwala. No? Lahat ng opportunity nasisira dahil biglang takot sila sa mainland China. Okay.
Opo. Maganda yung nabanggit sa kasaysayan. Hindi ko bang ito, sabi ng iba, considered as war booty. Kasi military base ito ng Japan. Nanalo ang US sa gera. Ang problema lang, inabandon na ng US. So practically, yung sabi ng iba, dapat US ang may sovereignty. Or Japan.
Well, hindi po. Kasi yung ito na pinakamalaking isla sa Strathclyde, no? Kahit punta, ang hirap mag-maintain continuously ng presence doon. Kasi napaka-isolated niya. At saka yung fresh water, yung pinaka-importante yung fresh water. Wala po siyang source of fresh water. Dahil doon, never siyang na-occupy continuously kahit sino. Until 1947, hindi 1947, 1956, no? Nung tinayo nila yung garrison. Okay? Simula noon, continuously siyang occupied, pero supplied siya from Taiwan. At dahil doon, hindi siya war booty, no? Kasi hindi naman siya claiming kahit kanino. Nung 1951 na nag-sign ng Peace Treaty, San Francisco Peace Treaty ang Japan, basically give up niya lahat ng mga na-conquer niya, including these islands. No? Pero itong mismong Strathclyde, hindi niya sinoli kahit kanino dahil hindi settled kung kanino siya at the time na kinuha niya yun.
Professor, paano tumitindig dito ang UN kung isang bansa ang tahimik ang United Nations na kiniklaim ang buong South China Sea based on their claims sa outlying islands or shoals? Imagine kung yung US ginamit yung definition ng contiguous territory ng China. E di kalahati ng Pacific Ocean, pag-aari ng US?
Hindi, kaya nga ang US hindi nag-claim ng ganun no? Kaya nga ang US, kahit na hindi sila signatory sa UNCLOS, hindi siya nakapirma, nirerespeto niya yon bilang customary international law. Ibig sabihin, kahit hindi sila partido, bound pa rin sila ng mga importanteng provision. Particular na yung mga provision tungkol sa maritime zone. No? Kinikilala ng US yon. Kasi nga, tama ka. Kung sasabihin natin na yung South China Sea ay pag-aari ng China, edi kanino yung Indian Ocean? Di ba? Kanino yung Atlantic Ocean? Sino yung nakaunang pangalan dyan? Meron tayong baka hindi nyo alam, meron tayong Philippine Sea. Yung hanggang Japan, Philippine Sea, sa atin yan, di ba? Kaya hindi tama yung kumbaga arbitrary na claim, no? Kaya nga nagkaroon ng UNCLOS, no, na prinomote din ng US at the time, para nga mapigilan yung mga ganong excessive and outrageous claim na wala naman talagang basihan.
Okay, may tanong pa po ako dyan.
Ariel, may dadagdag lang ako sa sinabi ni Jay. Isang complicated issue na nilabas mo yung Taiwan. Tandaan mo, may dalawang partido sa Taiwan, no? Nung time na nilabas ng Taiwan yung 11-dash line, Taiwan has been ruled by the Gumindang. So, talagang very close sa kanila yung issue ng 9-dash line. At lalo na, nung nag-file tayo ng case noong 2013. Ang panahon na yan, ang Taiwan under the administration ng Gumitang. So medyo nainis pa no si President Ma sa Pilipinas. Nagkaroon na tayo ng issue na may napatay yung Philippine Coast Guard noon. Tapos nangyari pa yung file tayo ng case. So talagang pinahiwatig ng Taiwan under the Gumindang na talagang meron silang stake. Pero ngayon nagbago Yung Democratic People's Party, DPP, sabi nila hindi namin issue yan kasi anyway hindi kami talaga China, Taiwan na kami. So ngayon medyo cool ngayon ang Taiwan regarding dito sa 9-line claim. No? Medyo ayaw naman nila maglabas para hindi naman kasi domestic politics din ito, pero hindi sila ganon kainit sa issue ngayon. If they will have it their way na pag dininounce ng Taiwan na part pa siya ng China or talagang kumbaga, they would support yung arbitral ruling. Pero ibang issue na yon. Ayun lang talaga yung complicated issue pag pinasok pa natin yung Taiwan. Okay.
Professor Heydarian, how ridiculous ba talaga yung claim ng China na kanila yung karagatan sa pagitan ng kanilang mainland at saka outlying islands? I mean, kung ganun yung Atlantic Ocean, dahil may French overseas territory, puputulin ng France yung Atlantic Ocean dahil meron silang teritoryo doon sa kabilang side ng Atlantic?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, actually, nakausap po natin, I had a chance to have interaction with both President Ma Ying-jeou and President Tsai Ing-wen over the past 6-7 years. And yung isa, sobrang adamant, this is Ma Ying-jeou actually, yung kanilang waters extend all the way almost towards our contiguous zone. No? At ito isang tao na may PhD in on-clause from Harvard Law School, right? Obviously questionable yung kanyang claim. At yung time ni Ma Ying-jeou, pinadala pa yung mga foreign observers para ipakita na yung Ito Abay ay isang self-sustaining island, therefore it can project its own 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. Kaya galit na galit sila sa arbitration award natin. Sa ilalim naman ng DPP, yung more progressive party nila si Tsai Ing-wen, they rather just tiptoe around it. So hindi sila kasi aggressive ni Ma Ying-jeou, but they tiptoe around that. So in short, huwag na lang tayo umakas masyado sa Taiwan kasi ang dami na nilang sakit ng ulo. The last thing that their president can afford is to piss off half of the population by also giving up their claims sa Ito Abay, etc. So I think I'm not making an excuse for them. I think that doesn't make them look good. But they rather just not talk about it precisely because they know they don't look good on that. No. Nevertheless, that shouldn't stop us from engaging with Taiwan without violating the One China policy. Although some are saying, maybe kung tuloy-tuloy itong bullying sa atin sa West Philippine Sea, baka we can tell the Chinese, maybe we can revisit the One China policy as much as we can also revisit how much EDCA could be relevant to the situation in Taiwan. No? So I na-appreciate ko po yung intervention in terms of Taiwan. Now, the other thing is this. Alam naman natin yung kalakaran dyan Kung hindi ka happy sa nangyari ngayon, you'll keep on prosecuting and prosecuting selectively facts from the past. So walang katapusan yan. Abutan natin ng ancient times yan kung we want to keep on making that kind of arguments. Diba? And nakita natin in the case of Ukraine, it was precisely this ridiculous arguments about Ukraine was part of Russia at some point and all of that to justify yung kanilang invasion. No? Although I always wonder why is Russia not invading Baltic states which were part of Russia, Tsarist Russia. Well, of course, we know why. Because they're part of NATO. That's why it matters for you to have an ally. Kaya yung mga maliit na bansa katulad ng Estonia, na nakapunta tayo dyan last year, hindi sila takot na sugurin sila ng Russia, even though sila rin parte ng Russian Tsarist Empire not long ago, no? Because they're part of NATO. So that's the problem. Pag itong mga rising powers, once they sense weakness, they will come up with any mumbo-jumbo, just like how Russia tried to come up with any mumbo-jumbo to justify yung kanilang invasion of Ukraine. Kaya nakapagtataka na meron tayong mga kaibigan dyan na supposedly nationalists, supposedly academics, at purong sinisabi lang parate, yung position ng China, di ba? So, obviously, you can go on and question everything. No? I mean, I even heard yung mga nagsasabi, tayo yung bully nung 1970s. Well, I mean, wala pang on-clause kasi noon. So, talagang scramble. At si Batongbacal, Professor Batongbacal, had a very interesting research which showed that ang US po ay kaya nga naging strategic ambiguity because takot sila na madamay sila doon sa ginagawa natin aggressiveness noong 1970s. But then again, this is pre-UNCLOS era. May UNCLOS na tayo. Yung arbitration award in consonance with UNCLOS. Kaya for me, to be honest, irrelevant yung mga sinasabi ng iba dyan na nire-prosecute nila yung nangyari noong 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. That's precisely why we did UNCLOS. At bilang isang mas maliit na bansa, this is really our best chance at semi-rule-based order, if not a fully rule-based order. Because ang kapalit nun is, etong mga malalaking powers, mag-whataboutism na lang sila. O nung Second World War, itong ginawa mo. So okay rin para sa akin, gawin ko ngayon. You know, like, this is a dangerous game. So, for me, honestly, let's just get out of that nonsense. Malinaw ang UNCLOS. Malinaw na ratify ng China yung UNCLOS. Again, isa pang whataboutism. Pero yung Amerika naman, di naman nila na-ratify. Yes, yung Senate ng Amerika, dahil maraming pasaway na Republicans dyan. But the US government follows UNCLOS, relevant provisions of UNCLOS as a matter of customary international law. So the irony is, and pati mga Indians may mention ngayon, is that yung mga bansa na hindi nag-ratify ay mas compliant sa UNCLOS kaysa yung mga bansa nag-ratify. So, and we see that's why even Vietnam, even Malaysia, even Indonesia na hindi kasama sa South China Sea disputes, ini-invoke yung ating arbitration award directly or indirectly, whether as threat to China or to defend their claims, no? Precisely because they see the value of what we did. And parati ko sinasabi, totoo yan na hindi tayo sinuporta ng ASEAN. Totoo yan na may mga ibang ASEAN countries hindi natuwa sa arbitration award natin. But magpasalamat sila sa atin. Binigyan natin sila ng bargaining chip. Binigyan natin sila ng fighting chance. That's why the weirdest thing is, pupunta ka sa Kuala Lumpur or punta ka sa Jakarta and Hanoi, tuwan-tuwa sila sa arbitration award natin. Dito mismo sa Pilipinas, may maririnig tayo, including a former president, na pinupupu, no? Dinadown yung sarili natin arbitration award. Only in the Philippines talaga. It's more fun talaga in the Philippines. Kaya gusto ko talaga yung slogan na yan. Kasi sa Pilipinas mo lang makita yung ganitong situation na pag you prosecute the Philippine case, ikaw pa yung warmonger. Ikaw pa yung masama. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is unacceptable. And for me, kaya I really don't want to go into the historical debates because you can always find some mumbo-jumbo twisted spinning. Kaya nga may batas tayo, kaya nga may UNCLOS tayo, kaya nga may ruling tayo, kaya nga nagpapasalamat yung mga kapitbahay natin sa atin. Kaya the last thing we should do is to prosecute the case from the other side who is not also complying with UNCLOS and modern prevailing international law. And last point po hindi po totoo na walang saysay yung arbitration award natin. This is the biggest lie. Since lumabas yung arbitration award, hindi na gumagamit ng China yung 9-9 claim. In fact, gumawa sila ng isa pang Forsha, I don't know, something like, Kung Fu Panda stuff, na pinagtawanan na lang na lahat ng experts. Tanggap naman namin, hindi naman island yung isa, pero when you put them together, so actually it worked in the sense that China is not using 4-9. It also worked, katulad ng sinasabi ni Justice Carpio among others, na meron ng legal basis ang Amerika to do more aggressive freedom of navigation operations. At yung mga ibang bansa, India, Japan, Europe, even though hindi nila sinasabi na freedom of navigation operations, kahit hindi sila pumapasok sa loob ng 12 nautical miles ng mga Chinese fake islands, they're still moving in the area to show na hindi lang Amerika ang hindi natutuwa, hindi lang tayo. So, hindi po totoo na hindi gumana yung arbitration award. It gave us a leverage. Ang totoo naman is hindi natin na-maximize itong leverage na yan. And for me, in fairness naman kay President Marcos, I think he recently mentioned that we are talking to our Vietnamese friends to potentially do what Indonesia and Vietnam are doing, which is, maritime border delimitation based on prevailing international law. So finally, we're seeing under the current administration some efforts to leverage what was not leveraged for whatever reason that we have right now. And sana naman, itong issue ng West Philippine Sea, wag natin gawin partisan issue. This is not the issue of whether si Digong ang binoto mo, whether si Lenny binoto mo, hindi dapat sana. Kaya nga Pilipino tayong lahat, whatever ethno-linguistic. I really find it weird na yung iba, they make it a partisan issue. Na just because Aquino administration was behind the arbitration award, they try to dismiss it as a Dilawan thing. That's the dumbest thing that you can ever hear. That's not gonna help the case of our country. Because you go to Vietnam, you go to China, good luck doing what some people are doing here. Kung punta ka sa China and you argue the Philippine case in China, tignan natin kung tatagal yung lisensya kung bilang journalist that you will get in, right? So that's what I'm saying. There's a scramble there. Unity, kumbaga, kailangan natin, and unity in purpose, but also unity in terms of appreciating yung validity ng ginagawa natin base sa prevailing international law. Hindi yung 1950s, 1940s, ancient era, Admiral Jean, all of this stuff.
Si Colonel MEDEL Aguilar, umating na po. Gandang umaga po sa inyo.
Good morning.
Tingin ko may binabasa po kayong kode kung pinapractice ba sa akin.
May
Ano po ba yan?
binabasa ko. Sinusubukan ko kung marunong pa ako magbasa. Anyway, it's about the rotation and reprovisioning mission that is about to take place soon. But I'm not at liberty to discuss, to reveal the date. We'll just know it later. So despite the incident on August 5, where Philippine supply vessels were blocked, subjected to dangerous maneuvers and water cannon, the Armed Forces of the Philippines is duty-bound to ensure the well-being of its personnel on the BRP Sierra Madre. We are therefore committed to the conduct of another RORE mission for our personnel and to maintain our presence in the Ayungin Shoal. This exercise of our sovereign rights and jurisdiction is a testament to the firm belief in the rules-based international order that underpins regional peace and stability. Ayungin Shoal holds a strategic importance for the Philippines and a fishing ground for our fishermen. Beyond its practical purpose, the RORE mission to the shoal is a clear demonstration of our resolve to stand up against threats and coercion and our commitment in upholding the rule of law. As we continue to pursue this humanitarian undertaking and defend our rights over our maritime zones, we also affirm our support for the peaceful settlement of disputes. We therefore call on all relevant parties to abide by their obligations under international law and respect the Philippines' sovereign rights, and jurisdiction over its maritime zones. Let me add also that I have a special message to the China Coast Guard for them to behave. They should not do any action that will endanger people's lives. For all the consequences that their singular act will do, the blame will be to them and to the authorities above them. So they should behave. Thank you.
Of course, alam po natin na maraming bagay na hindi pwedeng sagutin si Colonel Aguilar. Marami tayong mga tanong sa kanya. Limitado ang tanong sa kanya ng dalawang oras. Colonel, hindi mabanggitin kung kailan. Pero alam ng mga sundalo natin kung anong danger na kanilang susuungin.
Yes, they know very well. And the risk may be high, but of course, since we volunteered to this kind of job, and it is our obligation to defend what is ours, and it is also our obligation to look after each other, then the danger is no amount at all.
Yung po bang ating kaalyadong bansa ay informed about that reprovisioning mission ng Armed Forces, Ally?
I am not aware of that, but the planning is confined within the military organization.
So may pagbabago po ba na yung nakaraan Coast Guard ang nagbigay ng proteksyon? Ngayon po ba Philippine Navy ships, yung gray ships involved?
I think that it's already a tactical information that I cannot divulge right now. But I think what is different in the RORE mission that will take place is that all of the world is watching.
Sige, at this point, siguro, let's leave it at that and open the floor for questions. Ano? Pero I'd like to ask Attorney J. Batongbacal.
Request muna kasi si Colonel Aguilar. He has to leave earlier. Okay sa inyo?
Sige.
Okay, sige. May note.
Question muna para kay...
Tanongin mo na si Colonel Aguilar. May note. Kung pwede kay Colonel Aguilar muna. JP.
Hi sir, I'm JP from GMA Integrated News. Good morning din po sir sa inyo lahat. Colonel, sabi po ng DFA kahapon, in a fear, well, first, never nilang na-recognize ng Philippine government yung fishing ban, no, sa South China Sea and other parts ng ng area. Tapos sinabi rin ng DFA na nag-warn sila na ipapa-impose yung law enforcement sakaling merong mga Chinese fishing fleets na pumasok. How will AFP assist yung law enforcement? Can you shed light to that po?
We will come to that when the Philippine Coast Guard asks for our assistance.
Yeah. So Coast Guard po talaga yun no, sir? Pag ganun talaga, okay. Pero sir, sa part ba ng AFP, marami ba kayo monitor na recently, meron ba talagang nahuhuli ang Philippine law enforcer sa area na mga illegal fishers?
Probably that's for the Coast Guard to answer.
Okay, sige po. Last na lang siguro sir, if you know, ano pong masasabi nyo ng AFP sa pag-delegate, assign ng Pangulo kay Ambassador Locsin bilang special envoy? How does AFP feel about that or see that? Do you see that as something na parang magiging helpful po?
I'm sorry, but I think that information is beyond my competency to answer.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Manny from Philippine Star.
Hi sir, Justine Punsa lang from TV5. Last week, a few days ago, nagkaroon po ng rally ang karapatan sa may AFP. They're saying that there are bombings that's going on in the provinces Negros, Mindoro. Ang sinasabi po nila, naaapektuhan na rin ang pagkabuhayan ng mga farmers doon. Can we just get your statement regarding this sinasabi po nila?
They should go to court instead of doing rallies which is giving them nothing at all.
Colonel, yung by distraction ng leftist organization sa problema ng Pilipinas sa West Philippine Sea?
Propaganda.
So you believe na dinidistract kayo ng leftist organization para mawala ang focus sa West Philippine Sea?
I'm not sure, but I also heard some of them protesting against China. Yes, some of them. Even a congresswoman who also admonished China for what its Coast Guard did.
Ay, Colonel Ted po, GMA News Online. Sir, nabanggit niyo na rin last week, tapos ngayon, China Coast Guard should behave. Pa-explain, sir, anong klaseng pag-behave ba dapat yun?
They should not interfere in our rowing mission. We will see. We will see what will happen.
Sige. JP.
Sir, Colonel, meron po bang have there been any communication with your counterparts sa US forces na willing silang mag-escort sa resupply mission kung if ever? Kasi sinasuggest po ng ilang legislators na katulad ni Senator Tulfo kung pwedeng mag-escort ang Amerika sa mga vessel natin kapag nag-resupply mission. Meron po bang gano'n?
If ever there is, I am not aware of that.
Okay.
Sir, good morning. Katrina Domingo from ABS-CBN News. Japan, the United States, and Australia are planning to conduct a joint naval drill next week in the South China Sea. Where is the location? Would it be anywhere in the vicinity near Ayungin Shoal?
We are not aware as to where this drill will be conducted as of this time.
But sir, will the Philippines be, of course, participating in those drills? Or will it parang the usual strategy of napadaan lang sila doon or nagkataon lang na nandun sila malapit sa route ng resupply vessel?
If we will be invited, then probably we will join. But as to the exercise itself, I think it's for them to answer.
Parang gusto kasi tanong ni Ms. Domingo, baka yung kasabay ng exercise, doon kayo magre-resupply. Kasi may concentration ng foreign warships na mga kaalyado ng Pilipinas. But anyway, alam natin wala siyang liberty sa Pilipinas. Last question.
Sir,
Colonel Aguilar.
Colonel, sabi ng National Security Council, before the year ends, posible nang matuloy yung joint patrol operations with the US. So, do you have additional information regarding that sa part naman ng AFP? Sir, is that really possible within the end of the year?
We'll come to know additional information if the directive or orders is handed out to us.
Pero may mga pinapolish pa ba kayo sa part ng FB? May mga ina-iron out pa ba kayong mga issues? Kaya hindi pa mga finalized?
It's not for us to discuss, it's for the higher authority. What we will receive later on are directives coming from higher authorities. So if after we receive that, then we plan out how to execute it.
Okay, thank you po.
Tawag po ni isang tanong bago sabi nung kailangan na raw umalis. Binago ang taktika ngayon. Dati, hindi ina-announce na may resupply. Tapos nagduda pa na baka may nagtitip sa China. Ngayon, baliktad. Nag-anunsyo bago yung resupply. Why change ng taktika?
Probably, I think it's known to everybody that we have not completed the last draw revision. We only supplied half of it. So therefore, it is common sense that a resupply operation will take place soon.
Thank you po.
Sige. Yung statement nyo, Colonel, cannot be made available to media?
Yes, I will ask our public affairs officer to distribute it.
Okay. Sige, alis na ba si Colonel? May question pa?
Okay na.
In that case, siguro, we'd like to thank Colonel Aguilar for coming over. Tapos, let's focus now on yung specific issue na tinanong natin kay Atty. Batongbacal, which is yung yung security implications ng reclamation na ginagawa ng Chinese construction firm sa Pilipinas. Manila Bay reclamation. Lalo na, di ba yung US umaangal na sa involvement ng Chinese construction something.
Actually, bago pa mag-pandemic, na-involve na ako dun sa campaign ng ilang mga non-government organizations laban dyan sa reclamation plans nasa Manila Bay. No? At maraming dahilan, hindi lang yung security. Nandyan na yung negative environmental impact niya, saka yung negative social impact. Okay? Ngayon, dito sa issue ng Chinese mga vessels, no? Yung construction company na kinontrata dyan, gumagamit ng mga dredgers. No? Yung dredgers na yon, ang ginagawa niya, hinihigop niya yung ilalim ng Manila Bay at tinatambak nila hanggang sa lumabas siya ng tubig. Okay. Una, yung kumpanya na yon, gaya nga nang nasabi ng US, no, sanctioned yan, blacklisted yan. Dahil may mga shady deals siya. Blacklisted due to corruption issues sa mga ibang kontrata sa ibang bansa. Pero yung pinaka-importante, mukhang yan din yung gumawa ng mga artificial island dun sa Calayan Island Group. So, parang nakakatawa naman tayo na kung sino yung gumawa ng napakalaking challenge sa atin at tumulong sa pag-aagaw sa mga lugar natin, no? Binabayaran pa natin ngayon, binibigyan pa natin ng pagkakakitaan ngayon dahil sila yung kinontrata para gumawa itong mga reclamation projects sa Manila Bay. No? Sinira na nga nila yung marine environment dun sa malayo, sa Calayan Island Group. No? Sisirain pa nila ngayon yung marine environment dito sa malapit, sa Manila Bay. No? Na isang makasaysayan talagang bay, no? At talagang marami pa rin mga maapektuhan. No? Kahit sabihin mong very urbanized na yung Manila, maraming parte pa rin ng Manila Bay ay ginagamit ng ating mga mangisda. Dahil dyan sa reclamation na yan, no, hinuhukay na yung ilalim, di syempre yung mga accumulated na pollution dyan sa bay, lalo mong nilalabas na naman. Tapos, dahil nga yung malaking mga isla nakaplano dyan, parang haharangan niya ngayon yung mga lugar na publiko, katulad ng sa Rojas Boulevard, no? Yung mga area doon. Parang magiging private na mga lupa ngayon, yung nakaharap sa Manila Bay Sunset, yung nakaharap sa dagat. Itong mga lugar sa loob, katulad ng paligid ng Rojas Boulevard, ang mangyayari dyan, kagaya ng nangyari sa ibang lugar na dati bukas sa dagat, pero ngayon nasa loob na ng Maynila. No? Ito yung area sa paligid ng Intramuros. Yan, di ba? Ang Intramuros, noong unang panahon, katabi niyan dagat. Ngayon, puro reclaimed area na lahat ang nakapaligid sa Intramuros. Tapos yung mga residential and urban area sa paligid ng Intramuros, mayroong tinatawag na urban blight. No? Yung hindi na siya kasing ganda ng dati, no? Minsan maraming nagmumukhang slum area tuloy o kaya mga hindi na maintain na maayos. Kasi nga, kumbaga kung ano yung pondo na pwede sanang gamitin para panalitilihin maganda yung lugar, imbes na pupunta doon sa mga bagong lugar katulad ng mga reclamation area. So kumbaga, yung ngayon maganda, dyan sa may Rojas Boulevard, eventually papangit yan, magdidecay yan. Tapos, yung mga reclamation area na yon, anong itatayo dyan? Mga casino, mga hotel, mga mall, no? Na puro commercial na lugar na sino naman yan, no? Well, hindi pa natin alam ngayon, pero syempre, malamang kung sino yung gumagawa, siya yung may interest na bumili ng lugar at eventually gumamit. No? Yung concern ng US Embassy, particular yan sa kanya kasi, una, historical yung area. Pangalawa, kapaligiran siya ngayon, bale ng mga kung sino-sino, no? Mga Chinese casino o kaya mga malls o mga kung ano pang mga buildings, hindi na tuloy secure yung area niya. So, yun yung pinaka-concern ng US Embassy. Pero para sa kalakihan ng mga iba pang taong gumagamit sa Manila Bay, malaki yung concern katulad ng mga mangingisda. Wala na silang mapapangisdaan dyan. No? Obviously, kasi tatabunan mo. Sa ngayon, yung huli nila bumagsak. Kasi, siyempre, dahil sumama yung quality ng tubig, no? Wala silang makuha ngayong mga isda. Yung mga area na mayaman ngayon, kunwari dun sa may Cavite, yung mga fishery areas doon, yung mga gawa ng talaba, mga mussels, no, mga tahong, mawawala lahat yan kasi tatabunan yan. No? Yung kawit Cavite, mawawala yan, hindi na siya magmumukha kasing kawit, magmumukha na siyang kwadrado pag natapos yung reclamation na nakaplano. Okay? So, napakalaking paninira bale doon sa historic character ng Manila Bay yan. At kung lahat ng reclamation sa paligid ng Manila Bay tutuloy, marireduce yung area niya by mga 10% sa tingin ko. Sabi ng PRA, 5% lang, pero baka yan lang yung umpisa. Kung titignan niyo yung parang master plan, mga 10% yan. Pinaka-concern ko, taga Bulacan ako, okay? Yung southern coast ng Bulacan at Pampanga, yun yung northern coast ng Manila Bay. Historically yun, daanan ng tubig ng Central Plains of Luzon. Kaya bahain yun. At yung area na yun, puro mga swamp and marsh. Kaya nga naging fish pond area yan kasi yun yung madaling i-convert to fish pond. Matagal nang alam na dahil dun sa mga fish pond, medyo na papabagal na yung flow ng tubig, no? Yung drainage na papabagal ng mga fish pond. No? Kaya nagbabaha sa mga area ng Kalumpit, Hagonoy, etc. Ngayon, kung matutuloy yung plano nilang reclamation, parang haharangan nila yan ng solid ground, hindi na swamp. So wala pa nakakapagsabi kung anong ibig sabihin nun para dun sa loob ng Bulacan. Pero nakita natin ngayon, this year, biglang record levels yung flooding. Di ba? Last month ba yun, or 2 months ago. Mga lugar na hindi ganun kadalas mabaha, biglang binabaha ngayon ng napakabilis. Ang nagbago lang, sa tingin ko, ay yung pagtayo ng isang malaking reclamation area doon sa may sa may area, yung parang liko ng Manila Bay, kung saan nagde-drain yung ilang mga mahalagang ilog sa Bulacan. Tulad ng Marilao River, may Kawayan River, Kalintik River. Nasa tapat nila itong reclamation ng bagong airport. So marami talaga nagtatanong sa Bulacan, yang bang baha ngayon dahil dun sa airport, dahil ngayon rin lang yan tinayo. No? Only within the last year, biglang natabunan yung buong area na yon. No? So nagtatanong siyempre sila, pinipigilan ba niya yung pag-drain ng tubig? Kung isang reclamation area lang, kaya niyang gawin yon, paano pa yung iba pang nakaplano na talagang papaligiran yung buong southern coast ng Bulacan at Pampanga? So yung security, hindi lang tungkol sa embassy na napaka-specific, napakaliit ng concern niya. Yung security ng lahat ng mga tao dun sa coastal area ng Manila Bay ngayon ay in question. Dahil dyan sa reclamation area na yan, na ginagawa ngayon ng kumpanya at ng mga barko na ginamit din para i-threaten yung security natin sa Calayan Island Group. So lumapit na sila. Worst thing is, binabayaran pa natin sila.
Professor, educate us. Anong concern sa security ng US? May embassy nga sila sa Moscow. May embassy sa Beijing. I suppose kung ang takot nila ay mapapakinggan yung kanilang usapan, di pinapakinggan din sila. I suppose may kakayahan sila. And to think na pinayagan nga natin yung China company magtayo ng, ano tawag doon, cell site sa loob ng mga kampo ng militar.
Kaya nga, pero yun nga, kaya sabi ko, yung concern nila sa security na very specific sa situation na yun. Kumbaga, nababawasan yung seguridad ng mismong embassy at saka yung mga consular office doon. Kung matutuloy yung mga reclamation na yun, lilipat sila. Pretty sure. At maiiwan na lang siguro na historic site yung...
Pero bakit? Kasi kung ang pangamba ng US, hindi ko maintindihan na, educate us, the innocent me or the ignorant me. Sa Beijing, I suppose yung katabi building, listening device ng China. Sa Moscow, ganun din. Bakit ito? Hindi, bakit aalis? Dahil lang may tatayo yung building
Hindi sila ililipat nila.
Yeah, bakit ililipat nila? Takot sila, hindi ganun kagaling ang kanilang.
Siyempre, kung ikaw, gusto mo ng secure facility, tapos napaka-sensitive ng post, this is probably the most important post in Southeast Asia. Yung matagal na hanggang ngayon. No? Kung sino nagiging ambassador sa Pilipinas, hindi niyo napapansin, nagiging mataas na opisyal sa State Department. Ganun kahalaga yung posisyon na yun. Tapos, yung embassy na yun, parang central na hub yan. No? Kaya ganun kahalaga sa kanila yan. Mag-a-adjust sila siyempre. Wala silang choice. No? Pero siyempre, hindi mo sila mapipigilan mag-raise ng concern. Yung sa Beijing, sa Russia, alam nila yun, they went into it with eyes open kung ano yung security issues. Ito ang nakikita nila, nababawasan yung security nila dahil sa action natin. Vale. Kasi kung sa likod nila dagat, di ba? Ganun yung situation noon. Medyo mas safe, no? Para sa kanila, no? Pero ngayon kung mapapaligiran na sila ng lupa na kung sino-sinong nandun, siyempre, maisipan nila talaga kailangan lumipat.
Colonel, now may konti akong nalaman tungkol security. Itong US Embassy lilipat dahil pwedeng mapaligiran ng building na maaaring kontrolado ng China. Anong gagawin ng militar dun sa mga cell site sa loob ng kampo? O baka naman mas magaling tayo magtago ng sekreto kaysa Amerikano?
First, these cell sites, the installation of cell sites in military camps, only I think 5 of them, are covered by contracts. So there will be a process if you want to change the provision of the contract or you want to rescind it. Number 2, we also instituted measures that will, of course, protect the interest of our country, especially the operational matters of the armed forces of the Philippines. So we see no problem as of now as to the presence of these sites in our camps.
Ayoko maging sarcastic sa tanong, Colonel. Are we that more sophisticated than the US Armed Forces? Ay sila nag-worry 1 kilometro ang layo. Ay samantalang tayo, yung 3 hakbang lang ang layo.
Trust that we also have good experts on communication, information and electronics matters.
May dadagdag lang ako nun. Ang host nation ng yung bansa na nag-host ng embassy, meron siyang responsibility na i-ensure na secure yung embassy. Kasi may principles, yung inviolability of the embassy grounds, for example. No? Yung security niya, bale, ay responsibilidad ng bansa. Ang nagiging problema ngayon ay yung physical security mismo ng embassy. No? Kung dagat yung sa likod, mas madali mo siyang masisecure laban sa mga tao na gustong pumasok. No? Kaya nga tuwing may rally rin, duty ng PNP na i-secure yung embassy grounds. Kasi duty, responsibility natin yun. No? Ngayon, kung papayagan ng Pilipinas na mapaligiran siya ng lupa, di siyempre, yung responsibility na yun magiging mas mabigat actually sa Pilipinas. Kaya malaking problema yon. No? And since matagal na nga yung lugar doon, matagal na silang nakatayo dyan, no? Siguro malaki na rin investment nila dyan sa facilities dyan, natural lang na magko-complain sila kung makikita nila na yung mismo Pilipinas parang siya pa yung nagiging dahilan kung bakit nababawasan yung security ng embassy grounds. Kung baliktad yung role, ganun din dapat tayo. No? Magpuprotesta din tayo siguro. No? Kung yung Philippine Embassy, for example, sa US o kaya sa New York, no, yung mga offices natin doon, biglang napakadali palang pasukin at kung sino lang. At walang protection na ginagawa, walang pakialam yung bansa na nag-host natin. Ganun lang naman yan.
Pwede ako magdagdag din dito. Well, I mean, let's just be honest about it. Let's call a spade a spade. I think, hindi na-anticipate ng Amerika yung former colonizer natin na balang araw magkaroon tayo ng isang Presidente Duterte na will give all of this project to the Chinese and also, tama yung sinasabi ni Jay eh. Dun sa Russia and Beijing, eyes wide open. No, nung pumasok ang Amerika to build their bases. Pero dito sa Pilipinas, I think they never anticipated yung turn of events. So, including yung physical reality changing around the embassy. Pero wag natin kalimutan na President Marcos was in the Pentagon earlier this year, the first president under Biden to get the kind of, the highest level of treatment and official reception. And alam natin, of course, a key issue there was yung revised guidelines sa ating Mutual Defense Treaty. And if you look at yung mga revised guidelines na ginawa natin, one area of focus was cybersecurity. So hindi naman mangmang po yung ating mga officials. I think we're very aware of some of the threats that we're facing in light of some of the investments that were made in the past. And I think that's why yung revised guidelines sa pagitan ng Pilipinas at America is looking at cyber warfare, exactly, intelligence, counterintelligence capabilities, electronic warfare capabilities. But I think that's also what we have to really focus on right now. Of course, sinabi ni General a while ago na, the Chinese essentially have to think twice because hindi lang itong usapin ng Pilipinas at China. Obviously, dahil sa usapin ng EDCA, dahil sa tightening security cooperation sa pagitan ng Pilipinas at Amerika, at dahil doon sa emerging new Cold War sa pagitan ng China at Amerika, yung nangyayari ngayon sa Ayungin Shoal ay isang malaking issue ngayon sa Amerika. So nakikita natin sa mga kaibigan natin on Twitter, everyone is saying, watch out for this issue because US could get embroiled in this crisis. So as much as everyone is talking about Taiwan, now bigla, ang laki ng attention na nakukuha itong Second Taiwan Shoal because this is a test of our alliance. Because one important thing happened is, sa ngayon naman kayo Pangulong Digong na for a long time, medyo wishy-washy ang Amerika dun sa kanilang commitment. Kaya yung sinasabi ni Jay na strategic ambiguity from Kissinger, Nixon all the way to Obama, ambiguity siya, parang hindi siya strategic kasi hindi siya gumana dun sa Mischief Reef, sa Scarborough Shoal. I'll be very honest about it. So, see, we criticize also US, yung mga nagsasabi na But, since 2019, nung pumunta dito si Pompeo, dalawa sila ni now Special Envoy, then Foreign Secretary Teddy Boy Locsin Jr., absolutely clear ang United States na yung Mutual Defense Treaty ay mag-apply sa South China Sea, hindi lang sa Pacific in a big sense, at any attack on our aircrafts, on our soldiers, dun sa sundalo natin, sa mga vessels natin sa South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, will automatically be covered by MDT. Now, even more important, few weeks ago, kung tinignan yung statement ng State Department ng US, sinabi na kasama din ang Philippine Coast Guard. So, any attack on the Philippine Coast Guard, coercive. Now, pwede natin pag-awayan kung yung water cannon sa mukha mo ay coercive or hindi dahil dun may mga kaibigan tayo nagsabi, okay lang yung water cannon, ano lang, yung mga gawang kaibigan yan, at gawin natin sa kanila, tingnan natin kung matutuwa sila sa water cannon. Going back to this is a big test because now the US is saying even an attack, coercive attack on Philippine Coast Guard could potentially invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. Ukraine na nga, hindi aliado ng Amerika, binibigyan ng $40 billion ngayon na tinutulungan laban sa Russia. Tayo, treaty ally tayo. At hindi lang tayo any treaty ally, hindi lang tayo importante sa Southeast Asia, importante din tayo sa Northeast Asia because of Taiwan. Mas malapit po ang Manila sa Taipei kasi yung mga ibang capital ng ASEAN. So we are just too important for the United States to leave us to our own devices. And hindi na ito Nixon, hindi na ito Obama. Iba na po ang relasyon natin sa Amerika since 2019 at the very least. So yung mga argumento ng mga ibang kaibigan natin dyan na Amerika hindi tumulong sa atin ng ganitong panahon, that era is over. Ibang usapin na ngayon. Whether Republican or Democrat ka sa Amerika, tough on China sila. Kaya ang Pilipinas ay napakamahalaga sa kanila. They cannot afford to look weak and to leave us to our own devices. Kaya the second commercial issue now is not just Philippine-China, but it's also a test of our alliance and test of American leadership and commitment to security and prosperity in this part of the world. Kaya this is a global, important issue.
Sige. I have a question. We all know that the President of the Philippines is the architect of foreign policy. Pero ano yung limits ano yung rights na available to lower level officials to speak on foreign policy? I'm asking this because sabi ni Senator Escudero, bakit si Tariela nagsasabi na traitors yung mga nagko-complain, sa ano talaga ang ibig sabihin ng architect of foreign policy? I'd like to ask you yung tatlong
Sa level ho ng President, the President should talk about policy, meaning important decisions. For example, issue, let's say, how should we react to China's bullying, That will be made by the President. If we have to invoke, for example, the Mutual Defense Treaty, this is where, of course, the President will have to make the decision. Sa issue, of course, kay Commodore J. Tariala, I think his job is to talk about yung transparency. So I don't think the Commodore is talking about anything about policy. Sinasabi lang niya, ito yung ginagawa ng China, nagbo-blow ng water. I think yung tweet niya is more of a personal reaction. Ayun naman yung sabi niya doon, it has nothing to do with foreign policy. And sinuportahan naman siya ng Deputy Director General ng National Security Council, si Jonathan Malaya, which of course meron niya the National Security Council and of course the NSA is in a way directly connected with the Office of the President. It's part of the Office of the President. So once the NSC makes a position, nasa Office of the President po yan. It's above the pay scale ng even the Department of National Defense and even the Department of Foreign Affairs. Kasi it's directly connected with the Office of the... That's my opinion as a academic,
How about yung Secretary of Foreign Affairs? Yung Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
Ang supposed to be foreign affairs, diplomacy, conduct of foreign policy. Again, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs cannot make any decision pertaining to policy. Remember when former President Rodrigo Duterte made the decision to abrogate the Visiting Force Agreement, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs was actually against it at the last moment. But again, the decision had to be made by the President. Actually, the task of the Secretary of Foreign Affairs is simply to implement. But he cannot make any policy. Ganun din sa Department of, the Secretary of the Department of National Defense. So, I don't think, ayun yung position ko.
Meron pong tinatawag na alter ego. Okay? Yung mga secretaries are the alter egos of the President in the various departments. Kasi syempre, under our system government, The President is the architect of the foreign policy. Ibig sabihin, siya ultimately yung responsible. Siya yung gagawa ng important and key decision. Siya yung magbibigay ng direction. That's his responsibility as President. Okay? The reality, however, is one person cannot run the entire government on his own. And that's why he needs secretaries. Okay? So he appoints secretaries sa mga departments to take care of those particular areas under the department, agriculture, etc. That is basically management prerogative. Okay? Of course, he can take control of the department directly if he wanted, pero the practice is to appoint a secretary because it simply makes more sense and frees up the president, no, to make important decisions and not be bogged down by the details. Okay? So pagdating po sa foreign policy natin, Presidente ultimately ang responsible, pero yung day-to-day, ginagawa yan siyempre ng mga secretaries at ng kanilang mga undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, etc. Okay? In the absence of any parang contrary statement or action, pinipresume natin na kung ano yung ginawa ng secretary at sinabi ng secretary, yun din ang gagawin ng presidente kung siya yun. No? Yun din ang magiging statement ng presidente kung siya yun. Kumbaga, he's the agent bale, no? As far as the people are concerned. So, ganun po yun. Natural, no? Dahil malaki ang gobyerno, maraming levels, maraming nagsasalita, tapos lahat naman tayo tao. Siyempre, meron din tayong mga sariling opinion. Meron tayong mga personal opinions din. No? And sometimes, unfortunately, hindi na di-distinguish din ng mga tao, even by media, kung alin yung personal and alin yung official. No? So, doon siguro nanggagaling yung mga ganong klaseng problem. No? Pagdating dun sa issue nung mga statements nga ni Commodore Tariele, for example, para sa akin, natural lang yon. Kasi siya yung tinitira ngayon itong mga operator. No? Ako, tagal na akong tinitira niyan. Tinitingnan ko sa cellphone ko kanina, 2018, merong isang black prop against me na pinagkakalat nitong isang operator dyan. No? Na technically could be considered a case for cyber libel, pero hindi ko na lang pinapansin. Okay? Par for the course yan. No? Pero kami kasi matagal na rin kami dito, yun nga, nakasalang kami sa publiko. Kung bawat isang troll at operator isasagutin namin, wala kami magagawa. No? Hindi kami matutulog, hindi kami makakain. No? Kaya mga ganyan, hindi namin pinapansin. Pero ngayon, ang difference kasi ngayon, compared to 2018, nung kami nandito, ngayon parang mas mas lantad, mas organisado, hindi na patago, hindi na patraidor yung mga tirada. Minsan diretsuhan na. Kaya kung gano'n, edi lalo lang na-expose talaga yung debate. And kung sila tinatawag kaming amboy, bakit namin hindi sila pwedeng tawaging China propagandist? Di ba? Ano yun?
Sige. Question from ABS-CBN.
Sir, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is set to travel to Jakarta next month in 2 weeks to attend the ASEAN Summit. DOC was signed 21 years ago. Actual COC still nowhere in sight. And in the chairman's message during the ASEAN Summit in Labuan Bajo in May, I think, there was a mention of a single draft COC negotiating text. May we know lang po the difference because there have been a lot of documents already napapunta sa COC but it's not actually resulting into the COC. So may we please know the difference between the DOC and this single draft COC negotiating text?
Okay, let me address it first. The declaration, of course, came out around 2001. No, it was negotiated by ASEAN and China, but it's just a declaration. This is the goal that we want to do. First of all, let's have a clear definition on what is the COC or DOC all about. It has nothing to do with resolving the South China Sea dispute because it doesn't deal with the issue of sovereignty and even territorial rights. No, it has to simply have to do with managing the dispute by providing certain measures of behavior. No, non-militarization. Maintaining the status quo, cooperation in terms of fishery, search and rescue, so forth and so on. So in 2001, ASEAN and of course China came out with a declaration. They want to have a code of conduct. But the code of conduct, actually, the negotiation only commenced around 2014. But then again, it got frozen. Then in 2017, China said, probably we could have a wish list. So it's not actually the document itself, it's a wish list. But mind you, take note, China only agreed for this sort of a wish list for a COC after we won the case in 2016. So anyways, China's effort to offer a certain concession after, of course, the arbitral ruling came out in 2016. So this is just simply a wish list. ASEAN would come out, member states of ASEAN would come out with this. I want to have this. And so other countries would comment, China would have this. Now you ask about why has it been delayed for so long? I'll give you a number of reasons. Number one is an issue of geographic context. All the ASEAN states wants the whole South China Sea. China said only parts of the South China Sea that is still international. Because you have to remember China's 9-dash line. So yung 9-dash line in China covers about 85% of the South China Sea. So ang position ng China, everything within the 9-dash line, hindi yan covered ng Code of Conduct. Because this is already Chinese territory. So if we think na mag-i-stop yung harassment ng Chinese Coast Guard sa resupply natin sa Ayungin Shoal, just in case, hypothetically, there's a miracle that happened, na nagkaroon ng Code of Conduct, it will not. Because China considers Ayungin Shoal and the waters within Ayungin Shoal as within China's 9-dash line. So ayan yung issue. So kung matutuloy yung Chinese position, the Code of Conduct would only cover 15% of the South China Sea. Kasi sabi ng China, ayun lang naman yung international waters. The rest, 85%, hindi na cover ng Code of Conduct because this is Chinese territory. Ayan yung first. Second also is an issue of whether it should be binding or non-binding. The majority of the ASEAN countries said, this should be binding. China, of course, said, voluntary lang dapat yan. If it becomes voluntary, then we go back to the declaration of the Code of Conduct. Tapos isa pa yung, of course, sa wish list. In, I think, 2019, China came out with two very controversial provisions sa wish list. Unang-una, sabi ng China, all military exercises would have to be consulted to the 11, including China. So if we will conduct military exercise, let's say hypothetically with Japan, we will have to inform China and the other member states, which gives China the possibility of vetoing every military exercise that any ASEAN countries, even Indonesia, would have to conduct. The first country that objected, it's not the Philippines, it's Indonesia. Kasi despite its proactive policy ng Indonesia, Indonesia conducts military exercises with the US, with Australia, and even with China. Pangalawa, yung wish list din ng pinasok ng China, no joint development with any third parties. All joint development, joint exploration will just be between China and companies within the among the 10 member states. So ayun yung issue talaga kung bakit tumatagal. Pero at least I'm not a totally pessimistic person. At least ang sinasabi ng iba ng ASEAN, at least we're still negotiating. Siguro the Code of Conduct would finally come out during the time of our grandchildren. By the time kontrolado na ng China yung buong South China Sea. Okay.
So, Professor, the way na naintindihan ko yung paliwanag ninyo, pag pinagtibay as is yung Code of Conduct, magiging Ode of China ito. Practically, sinuportahan natin yung narrative ng China at kung magiging binding, nangako pa tayo, nakikilalanin 85% ang kanila.
Ayun nga yung isa eh. Nakalimutan ko pa ng isang issue, no? Kasi ang position din ng Pilipinas, the Code of Conduct should not just be a political exercise. It should be based on international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So, definitely, pag minention mo na yung UNCLOS, medyo na yung China, pag minention mo pa yung arbitral ruling, nako, wala na, non-negotiable na yan. But of course, ang position, especially this current administration, the UNCLOS as a whole, even of course yung July 12, 2016 ruling. So I failed to mention that. So ayun yung 4 major obstacles regarding the why the code of conduct hasn't been. In fact, hindi pa lumalabas yung draft. The countries are simply commenting dun sa wish list. Para yung malapit na Pasko, ilang araw na lang, no? Maglalagay ka doon ng ano, ito yung wish list ko, lahat sila magko-comment doon. Okay, Jane?
Para lang din maklaro yung mga documents at yung mga abbreviation of DOC, COC, SDNT. May istorya yan kasi. Okay? 1988, nagkaroon ng violent na confrontation between Vietnam and China. Maraming Vietnamese yung napatay. Makita nyo nga sa YouTube yan eh. Okay? Dahil doon, ang Pilipinas, no, nag-advocate, kumbaga nagkampanya diplomatically, na dapat yung South China Sea disputes, no, ay ma-solve peacefully. No? So, within ASEAN, yung Philippines ang nag-take ng initiative na magkaroon ng paraan, magkaroon ng commitment bale na hindi magkagera within ASEAN. Kasi Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Brunei, which comprised 5 of the 6 members of ASEAN at that time, lahat sila merong mga competing claims. Okay? So para nga ma-avoid yung violent clash, magkaroon ng gera, nag-advocate ang Manila, ang Philippines, ng peaceful mode of dispute settlement. Okay? Naging successful yung diplomatic effort na yon kasi noong 1992, nag-issue ang ASEAN ng Declaration on the South China Sea, 1992 Declaration. Doon sinabi na nagko-commit yung lahat ng miyembro, lahat ng may claim bale. Una, sa principle ng self-restraint, hindi sila gagawa ng aksyon na mag-escalate, na magpo-provoke doon sa disputes. At pangalawa, nagko-commit sila sa peaceful modes of dispute settlement. Hindi sila magigera. Imbes maghanap sila ng paraan na mapayapa, whether it's negotiation or going to court. Kasama lahat yon. So yan yung 1992 Declaration. Yung China, hindi parte ng ASEAN. Pero, nag-accede siya, nag-sign on siya doon sa ASEAN Declaration 1992. Kaya lang, 1995, hindi siya nag-exercise ng self-restraint, kinuha niya yung mischief brief. Okay? Tinayuan niya ng kubo. Tapos, 4 years later, yung mga kubo na yun, ginawa niyang kondominium. Dahil doon, ang Pilipinas, no, nag-advocate again, no, ng isang code of conduct sana. No? Kaya 1996, okay, 1996, inadapt nung ASEAN yung proposal ng Pilipinas na dapat magkaroon ng code of conduct. No? This is after 1995. Okay? Dahil doon, nag-umpisa yung proseso, no, ng pag-propose na ng code of conduct. By that time, kasi tinutulungan ko ng DFA that time, kami actually gumawa ng unang draft, no, together with the late Dr. Baviera. Yung pinag-usapan noon na eventually naging DOC, 2002 DOC. So from 1995 onwards to 1990 to 2002, ang tagal na proseso talaga. Doon sa proseso na yun, yung Vietnam at Philippines ang kumbaga nagtutulungan, no, na ma-hammer out itong dokumento. Yung original idea natin, yung Code of Conduct at the time, parang binding instrument talaga sana. No, para mag-commit again ng lahat ng bansa, kasamang China, sa peaceful modes of settlement ng dispute, at saka para hindi na maulit itong nangyari sa mischief brief na nag-commit ka nga sa document, pero yung pala, meron kang i-occupy na bago. No? So, hindi tayo naka-produce ng binding treaty, imbes yung DOC, Declaration of Conduct in the South China Sea, na ASEAN-China ngayon. 2002, ASEAN-China DOC. Nakalagay dun sa DOC, however, no, una, inulit yung self-restraint, at saka yung peaceful modes of dispute settlement. Nilagay din, na napakahalaga sa atin, yung principle ng no new inhabitation o presently unoccupied features or uninhabited features. Ayaw natin na madagdagan pa, no, yung mga lugar na merong tinatayuan. Okay? By that time, nakatayo na tayo sa Ayungin Shoal, by the way. So, hindi ano yun. So, freeze dapat. No? Freeze muna status quo. Okay. At saka, nandun din yung principle na yung self-restraint, non-new occupation, nandun din yung cooperation, maritime cooperation. Kaya lang, from 2002, nung inanunsyo yun, na-sign, medyo nahimik ng konti, no, ang lugar, until bandang mga 2007. 2007-2009. Bakit? Hindi natin alam, 2007, yung palang China, nag-i-explore sa katubigan ng Vietnam. Doon unang nangyari yung mga ramming incidents between China and Vietnam. Pero hindi natin alam at that time, hindi nila binabalita. Wala silang transparency noon. 2009, yung mga Southeast Asian nations, mga maliliit na claimants, sabi ko nga, nag-upisa nang i-align yung mga claims nila sa UNCLOS. In-implement nila yung UNCLOS. At yung response ng China baligtad, lalo siyang nagpumilit ng sarili niyang 9-dash line. Okay? So, nangyari yung Scarborough Shoal 2012. Ginawa ng China, among the responses, is gumawa ng artificial island. Obviously, in total violation ngayon sa DOC. Okay? Pero dahil nanalo tayo sa kaso, no, naghanap ng paraan siguro ang China, paano to? Okay? Parang mapapakita na medyo okay ang China at ASEAN. So, nag-renew ngayon yung effort, no, na mag-negotiate ng COC. Pero nabago na yung kondisyon. By this time, mas marami na yung miyembro ng ASEAN, naging 10 na, at kang karamihan hindi claimant. Tapos na yung Southern Sea Arbitration. No? Tapos nandun yung mga artificial islands ng China. So, doon ngayon biglang umusad ulit yung commitment sa DOC na nagsabing dapat mag-produce tayo ng COC, binding COC. So, dahil nag-umpisa uli yun, no, paano kang gagawa ng dokumento na 11 yung partido? Anong pag-uusapan niyo? Paano kayo mag-umpisa mag-usap? Kailangan mo ng papel. No? Basehan ng usapan. So, 2017, lumabas yung SDNT, Single Draft Negotiating Text, which as Rene described it, is like a wish list kasi ang ginawa ng Singapore na chair, basically hiningi sa lahat ng miyembro, ano ba gusto niyo makita dyan sa potential na code of conduct na ini-negotiate natin? So, lahat, dami mga suggestion. No? Walang negotiation, basta tanggap lang suggestion. So, syempre, nagkaroon na ngayon ng pag-uusapan, bale. And since that time, yun nga ang pinag-uusapan. Yun yung basehan ng usapan. Napakabagal na proseso yon kasi 11 bansa yan, 11 partido nag-negotiate. No? Kaya ngayon, yung mga anunsyo, no, matagal. No? Naunsyo pa nung pandemic. No? Pero yung nagkakaroon ng progress in the sense na unti-unti, no? Nagkakaroon ng ilang agreement, nagkakaroon ng disagreement, no? Pero unti-unti, pinag-uusapan pa rin yung dokumento. So, next week, yung 40th session yata, if I'm not mistaken. 40. And again, titingnan na saan sila makakaabot dun sa usapan. Kasi nga, napakahaba ng dokumento na lumabas. Kasi 11 countries put in suggested text. No? Nag-leak yung unang version. Halos 20 pages yata yun. 19 or 20 pages. More than 90 paragraphs yata yun. So yun ang iniisa-isa nila bawat paragraph. Matagal na usapan bawat paragraph. Kasi nga, ang nangyari ngayon, 11 countries negotiating one single text na iba-iba yung pananaw, iba-iba yung interest. May kanya-kanyang bantay bale yan. So kaya mabagal talaga yung proseso. So wala pa yung COC. Sa ngayon, SDNT pa rin ang pinag-uusapan nila. Pero yung SDNT na yon, pag natapos na nila pag-usapan, yun na yung magiging COC.
Can I just quickly on that? I mean, we just have to bring it down to these bare bones. Ang nangyayari po dito dahil malapit ng FIBA World Cup, no? Ay dinidribble tayo ng China. No? Obviously, dinidribble tayo because what's happening here is talk and take. So habang nag-uusap tayo at may illusion ng openness, negotiation, harmony, all that blah blah blah, iniiba yung facts on the ground. No? So kaya nga ang proposal natin dati was triple freeze. Hindi pwede tayo mag-negotiate ng code of conduct habang iniiba ng isang partido yung facts on the ground literally through geoengineering. So first, freeze on reclamation. Second, freeze on any aggressive kind of military activities. At third, increasingly now, of course, dapat yung issue din ng militia ng China na ang laking problema sa atin ngayon, di ba? So for me, mas dapat yun ang priority ng ASEAN ngayon. i-freeze muna natin yung situation bago natin pag-usapan dahil parang ang China po ay gumagawa ng mga syudad in 2 to 3 years, gumagawa ng mga railway and all to 2 to 3 years, pero 20 taon na, quarter of century na, hindi pa rin matapos yung papel na yan, di ba? So, we know what's going on here. So let's call a spade a spade. I also agree with Dr. Castro that it doesn't mean that we have to give up on the process. We should use the process to expose yung kalokohan na nangyayari ngayon, which is talk and take and talk and take. I want to also add that perhaps it's also time for us to talk about code of conduct among ASEAN countries themselves. We keep on saying this for the past 4 or 5 years, but now kasi meron na tayong arbitral tribunal ruling. And last time I checked, there's no major opposition dun sa relevant provisions ng ating arbitration award from key ASEAN claimant state. Kasi ang pinaka-problema natin dun is, I actually do not agree with Cambodia bashing. Yung mga nagsabi, in Cambodia kasi dependent sila sa China, so hindi talaga natin maasahan. Remember, ASEAN is consensus-based, which is actually unanimity, which is a recipe for paralysis and disaster. Pero ano bang tulong natin sa Cambodia nung may problema sila sa Mekong River with China? Wala. So baka tayo umasa ng tulong sa Cambodia kung hindi na rin natin tinutulungan yung Cambodia? Do we even talk about the Mekong River problem? Malaking problema yan, ha? Yung Laos and China gumagawa ng mga dam dyan, nawawala ng tubig yung mga nandun sa baba. What are we doing for Cambodia? Nothing. So, asa tayo ng Cambodia will risk 1/3 of their aid and national budget from China because solidarity? Of course not. So, I'm not a fan of Hun Sen, but I'm not a fan of the Cambodia bashing. So, let's narrow it down. Let's make it between really the claimant states. First among us in ASEAN, dahil at least tayo, meron tayong basic agreements on a same version of reality. Not some mumbo-jumbo that biglang dumaan daw si Zhanghe dito sa kanila na yan. Well, nauna pa yung mga Badjao, 60,000 years na, if you want to play that ridiculous game. No? So for me, let's call a spade a spade. This is a talk and take modus operandi, right? They can make whole cities in 2 to 3 years, but apparently they cannot finalize a paper in a quarter of a century. So we know what's going on. But let's do a COC among us. Kaya itong border delimitation efforts natin with Vietnam, I commend President Marcos Jr. for moving in the right direction on that front. Kasi finally we're realizing, okay, they want to play the illusion, we should do that. Last thing I want to say here is this. Again, hindi tayo fan ng mga neocons dyan sa US, but if there's one thing right na sinabi nung isa dyan sa Trump administration, si John Bolton was, kung gumawa kayo ng mga kalokohan ng COC dyan, di namin tatanggapin yan. So ASEAN has to be careful because if you make a COC with China, which is what Dr. De Castro was mentioning, which gives China, kaya nga, be careful what you wish for. Legally binding, but China's version of law, international law, may problematic yan. Sabi ng Amerika, di namin tatanggapin yan. We will reject any code of conduct that undermines the legitimate rights of countries who are not party to the disputes. No? So this is why I think this is a moment of truth, and I feel bad for Indonesia kasi Indonesia wants to be nice. They are the de facto big brother who do not want to act like the big brother. And that's why, huwag na tayo umasa masyado. For me, the future is not ASEAN multilateralism. The future is ASEAN minilateralism. Work on an ad hoc, specific, goal-oriented, results-oriented basis with Malaysia, with Brunei, never mind, with Vietnam, and potentially also with Singapore and Indonesia. Yun lang, we can get something out of China. Because China will care if Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia work together. Because we can make a difference.
Professor Richard, the other days, si President Marcos may guest from Japan. Dito sinabi niya na nag-evolve ang partnership ng Pilipinas at Japan papunta sa defense. Now my question is, panahon na ba para bumuo ng alyansang bago? Pacific Treaty Organization? Yung mga bansang kaagaw sa teritoryo ng China? O hindi pa napapanahon sa ngayon?
Mahirap mag-talk ng alliance eh. What we're dealing with Japan, and of course even Australia, security partnership, limited lang yan. In fact, yung security partnership natin with Japan, nangyayari na, no? Sila yung nag-finance doon sa mga Coast Guard vessels natin. Sila yung nag-provide ng 5 PC-90 long-range patrol aircraft. So, nangyayari na yan, no? Limited lang yung partnership, tinutulungan sa Coast Guard. Kasi pag sinabi mong alliance, complicated na yan. Kasi pag alliance, tulungan na yan. Mutual assistance. Reluctant pa rin siguro ang Japan na maging ally natin. Kasi ayaw niyang i-replace ang US. Ang posisyon ng Japan, Australia, may partnership tayo with the Philippines, pero hindi natin i-replace ang US. Kung iniisip mo ang NATO-style system na talagang mutual assistance, baka medyo matagalan pa eh. Kasi sinabi na sa atin yan nung panahon ng nininegotiate natin yung Status of Forces Agreement with Australia, sinasabi ni the late Miriam de Peso Santiago, dapat alliance na. Sabi ng Australia, hindi. Kasi isa lang talaga dapat yung ally natin. Among us, may partnership tayo, tulungan tayo. Pero sa ngayon, sa posisyon nila, isa lang talaga yung treaty ally natin lahat, ang US. Ayan yung tinatawag natin hub and spoke system. So, kung mag-iisip tayo ng NATO, siguro matatagalan pa eh. Yung NATO style talaga, lahat yan. All for one and one for all.
But do you agree din sa kanina binagit ni Professor Heydarian na I think Ukraine nga wala namang kaalyado na bansa, walang treaty ally, pero tinutulungan pa rin. So, gano'n din mangyayari sa atin?
Hindi, kasi sa Ukraine, tinutulungan sila in terms of military assistance. Pag alliance talaga, total yan. Talagang an attack on one would be an attack on all. And of course, sa NATO treaty, ang purpose talaga niyan is susuportahan kanila up to the very end. Ang Ukraine, hindi pa rin member ng NATO.
Ganito, pwede mag-invoke daw ang Pilipinas ng Mutual Defense Treaty sa US. Alam natin ng US may treaty sa Japan na may automatic din na respondent. Ibig sabihin, pag napasabak sa gulo ang Pilipinas, automatic involve ang Japan. Same thing with Australia?
Pwede, hypothetically, kasi they're also required to assist the US. Same is true with Australia, are also required, even South Korea. Kasi meron tayong mutual defense treaty. So, pero hindi ang automatic, no? Kasi at the end of the day, yung again, pumapasok dito yung architect, the decision will still have to be made by the national leadership.
Thank you. No, fantastic. I think that the idea there is integrated deterrence. Yun yung term dyan, na together a number of allied countries, even though some of them don't have direct mutual defense treaties with each other, so kung matapos natin itong VFA negotiations with Japan, no? Because now I think we have a semi-confirmation na mukhang we're looking at a VFA now with Japan, not just any kind of mutual logistics agreement. So we have VFA with Australia, we have mutual defense treaty with the US. So when you put all of those elements together, ang point is you create collective deterrence or integrated deterrence capability. Kasi alliance, the way we look at it is so 20th century. Iba na ngayon minilateral na ngayon fluid na ngayon, integrated na ngayon. And actually, that might do the trick. That itself might do the trick. But that's where we have to develop more interoperability with like-minded countries in the region. Again, just to be clear, we are doing none of this to provoke. The one that is provoking is the one who's bullying the West Philippine Sea. The one that is provoking is the one threatening to invade Taiwan. Kaya hindi ko maintindihan yung argument na warmonger ka if you're developing your defensive capabilities, no? This is all to prevent a war in Taiwan or a war in the West Philippines. Because, as I said, if Ukraine was a member of NATO, they would not have been invaded, period. Precisely because pinangako sila na maging NATO member and then hindi binigay sa kanila, nakalutang yung Ukraine up for grabs na for Russia. I'm not saying China is the same as Russia, but let's not risk leaving Taiwan vulnerable, nor the Philippines in the West.
So para ito yung relasyon ng mga kabataan ngayon, yung walang label?
Medyo mahabang usapan yan. No, I think 50 Shades of Grey.
Ano sabi nila? Anong tawag dito ng bata? Parang MU. May mutual understanding.
No. I mean, for me, even if, there's certain forms of mutual understanding when push comes to shove, mukhang, you have to get real and honest. So this is a situation like that whereby hindi ka pwede maging wishy-washy kasi the entirety of American leadership in the region will be under question. That's why they're helping Ukraine. Now, indeed, not even their ally. Imagine if they allow Taiwan or the Philippines to slip through their fingers, all the fence-sitters will all defect to China na. So, ang laking issue ito. So, totoo naman ang interest natin at Amerika ay hindi 100% overlapping. This is not because of altruism of America. But America has an interest not to look like a fool and to lose all its allies in the region. So, kaya nga mahalaga tayo sa kanila. Again, convergence of interest. Kaya tama yung sinabi ni Gibo Chidore, yung ating defense secretary, na it's no one's business to tell us what to do with other countries who we have common interests with, right? This is not about, tuta tayo ng ganitong bansa or tuta tayo ng ganyang bansa. That's a very low-level intellectual thinking, to put it nicely.
Okay, thank you. Sige, last.
Sir, sorry. Indonesia, US, and Taiwan are set to have their elections next year. How will a possible change of leadership affect the Philippines' interests or stance in the West Philippine Sea?
I think Taiwan will be more crucial. The U.S., whether you'll have Joe Biden being re-elected, and of course, either the former businessman will return back to the White House, I think the policy would remain the same, especially with regards to China, because there's only one issue that unites all Americans. That is, of course, a strong position against Taiwan. What's the other country again? Indonesia, not so much. I think there's also consistency in terms of Indonesia's foreign policy. The election that we should watch for would, of course, be Taiwan.
Okay, on that note, we'll have to close this Saturday session. We'd like to thank from right Colonel MEDEL Aguilar, spokesperson ng AFP, for giving us a very strong statement on what the position of the Philippine government should be with regard to the situation in the West Philippine Sea, which is for the Chinese Coast Guard to behave. I don't think you can have a stronger message than that. Nandito rin si Atty. Batongbacal ng UP College of Law, DLSU Professor Renato de Castro, and Richard Heydarian ng Asian Center ng UP. Okay. Thank you all to our academics for giving us free lessons on foreign policy and our country's position on this issue. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat at marami rin salamat sa inyong pagdalos sa ating regular news forum. Thank you very much.
Sa gilid lang kayo.